Welcome to Circular Firing Squad. I'm Marty Gensius, a counseling faculty at Kent State University and host for Circular Firing Squad. We have 3 members, 6 questions, and 6 answers. Well, 3 answers for each question. We couldn't answer the questions twice. Each squad member generates, in this case, 2 questions because we've got a smaller pool tonight that we'll all have to answer. So let's get into the game and let's see who's with us on this episode.
Hi, everyone. Elliott Ingersoll from Cleveland State University and host of Apply Topically.
Hey, everybody. Mitch Conrad, licensed professional counselor.
Okay, and if I have the notes up correctly, Elliott, you've got the first question.
All right. What's a memorable tornado or storm warning story for you?
So we're going to go back I'm not exactly sure when this happened because it was a dream, but it is a memorable dream to me, one that I still remember. I used to live out in North Royalton as a kid and would play baseball in the summers. And I remember as a kid that like the storms that would come through always seemed worse than they actually were. But they were quite like scary as a kid because I didn't really know what was going on yet. And it's like the expectancy that there's a tornado and there's never really a tornado in Ohio. And, for me, I remember this story because it was, I had this fear of werewolves that I think I've mentioned on the show before. And that this was actually something where inside of this dream, there was a storm approaching alongside the werewolf. And it was a little scary, to say the least, to someone who I think was like 8 at the time. And as the storm kind of continued to come in, the werewolf would howl and the howl would get louder. And eventually I remember like the werewolf like coming to the front door, sort of like the third howl, opening the front door, seeing like this huge thunderstorm going on and this werewolf like right at the front of the door. There's certainly some counselor out there who might be interested in doing some dream interpretation there. But for me, it stemmed from like a fear of werewolves based on the movies that my dad had watched. At least. And then also some fear of storms just outside in North Royalton where it can be a little flat in the area that we lived in. And so there was always like a worry as a kid of like, we might actually get hit by something here that's a little bit scarier. But
flat, you say flat. Let me tell you about flat. Champaign-Urbana, Central Illinois. Yeah. I went to my undergrad and grad there, and I stayed in a place called Hendrick House. And when I go back, it's still there. It's this towering kind of thing. I don't know how many flights it was, but it had to be close to one of the taller buildings in the middle of Central Illinois. And I remember being on the 5th floor. And if you're in Central Illinois and it's the fall, you're constantly getting hit with tornado warnings and, tornado groups coming at you. And after a while, as a student, we stopped taking any of that seriously. So what happens when you have tornado warnings is you're in a big building. There's no place to really go. So it means if the storms are headed that way and you think it's going to be bad, it means it's time for a kegger. And that's one of my most memorable tornado warnings was getting a kegger and letting the storms come through. I remember 5 long glass panel windows in each room. And I spelled out on the top row, T-NATO, and on the bottom row, sucks on the window. And we just drank beer and had a good old time. So that's my favorite.
I like those. Yeah, that werewolf, there's some interesting Jungian material there, Mitch.
Oh, yeah.
I think mine, as I shared in another show, one of my favorite jobs was newspaper carrier. I must have had that 10 or 11 years. And, in the summer, I would just carry in a lot of storms. We had these sacks. You got some days the paper was thin. You could just take one bag, but on Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday, you needed 2 sacks. And this was a Wednesday. And so my paper route took about, probably an hour, 20 minutes to do. And then I would see how fast I could do it on the light days. Well, on this particular Wednesday, I was loaded down with papers and we had 2 tornado warnings while I was carrying, and it was a really amazing storm. I find them really energizing, and several of my customers wanted me to come into the house and wait, and I just enjoyed being out in it. And I think I did the whole route in about an hour because it was motivating because there was lightning, thunder, it was pouring down rain. And it was really warm out. It was a summer storm, so it wasn't like I was freezing, but the wind was amazing. And I finished, and I think we'd had a tornado touch down in the county a couple of times, but it was just, I don't know why, but it was one of the most innovating experiences I'd had up to that point in my life. And then after that, I always found storms to be kind of like companions. And I would always like to take the kids outside and we'd watch the storm roll in on the porch. You know, my dad and I used to do that too, but that one was a biggie. And I just remember feeling I was going to be okay. I didn't really worry, kind of foolishly, but that's youth. And so, trudging that day with the papers, that was something.
Okay. How come all of my memories of tornadoes are fond memories?
Because your house didn't get hit.
I was recording a podcast a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember which one it was. And I had to shut down a class. Oh, I know which one it was. I had to shut down a class because of the tornado warnings. And we were online. So it was like, okay, we'll see you in 45 minutes. It's supposed to be over then. And so we got back on 45 minutes. It took a chunk of time out of the class for me. And then, nothing happened. 45 minutes, 45 minutes is over. And so I started to do a podcast because class was over. And I had a couple of people online from all over the nation. And the tornado siren went off again. And my wife went nuts and said, you get down in the basement. And it was, when I checked it, it was like 15 minutes that it was going to be a warning for us. And she went down in the basement. I shouted, I'm in the middle of a podcast. I'm not going to stop these guys because they're not experiencing it. Believe me, if the windows start rattling, I'll cut it down. But right now it's just raining, She was not pleased. But she forgot about it. She went upstairs, went to bed after that. I worked a little late, and she forgot about it, and nothing was said about it the next morning. Mitch, you've got the next question.
All right. What are your thoughts on pairing the words need and therapy?
Mitch, you've got to help me with this one. I don't know if this is a particular context that you're aware of, but I'm trying to figure out, explain it to me.
Yeah, so this question is because I've heard, I think in the past several years, just in terms of people saying the words like, I'll hear people say like people need therapy. And I think it's that need that I'm keying in on, or people saying like everybody needs therapy. It sounds like quite a broad claim to me. And so I'm wondering what people think of something like that.
Well, that changes my answer, I guess.
Sure.
My answer was primarily, I think people are triggered by the word therapy. At least in my program, we have people who go nuts, faculty who go nuts when they're now. Of course, what do I teach in the course? One of the courses I teach? Marriage and family
therapy.
Exactly, which is how the certification bodies refer to it. But if I refer to it that way in amongst my colleagues, they're like, we shouldn't be teaching students to use improper language. They're counselors, they're not therapists. And yeah. So I'm old and I don't have to change. So I'm going to continue to use the word therapy. Occasionally I will call clients patients because within the context of what we're talking about, they would be referred to as patients when we talk about psychiatric stuff. They wouldn't be referred to as clients necessarily. So I'm one of those people that think everybody, to try and answer your question, although I think I just did, at least the way I wanted to answer it. To answer your question, I'm one of those people who think that the best things that have happened to me in terms of my own personal development, and frankly, in terms of my ability to be a good counselor and supervisor, was because of my own therapy. And I'll use that term because it felt like therapy. It didn't feel like someone was giving me a bunch of ideas or we were talking about things I could do. It felt like therapy. So I don't get triggered by the idea that someone, quote, needs therapy or the pairing of those words, because it rang true for me. And frankly, if it could do for other counselors what it did for me, I think they all need therapy, because it greatly improved my third eye, whatever you want to call it, my intuitiveness. It got me going into my gut. It was all the stuff I needed to be a better tooled counselor than what we don't get from watching students do their micro skills. So yeah, that's my answer. I'll stop at this point.
I am endlessly fascinated by the types of word magic people engage in, trying to convince themselves of something that just doesn't matter. But anyway, yeah, when I read the question, I thought, when someone pairs those words in the first person, I take them sincerely at their word and, maybe try to recommend somebody. When it's done in the second person, I think they're probably an arrogant ass. And when it's done in the third person, I assume they're just blowing off steam. So those are kind of my responses to the ways to use the word.
Yeah, thanks for both of your answers. Marty, appreciated what you said too about the idea of like being in, whether it be counseling or therapy, but how that can, and I've observed this for myself too, how that's changed how I've approached counseling. I can't imagine that I would be the same kind of counselor or person if I hadn't gone to therapy myself. This is, it's a curious kind of concept to me. Because I think I have been hearing more along the lines of the phrase like everyone needs therapy. And that seems like a really kind of like big reach for me, I guess. Because like I don't think that's necessarily the ideal if everyone's going to counseling or if everyone's going to therapy. I think like it's beneficial for people to go, and it's a choice. I choose to go. The need is sort of it feels like kind of like a forceful kind of word to me there. But I also see how beneficial it is for, especially I imagine for mental health professionals out there. Like one of the things that I feel like I've keyed in on, or is sort of like a developing belief of mine, is like, I feel like when I'm doing better in a way that I'm seeing someone inside of therapy and they're also that they're also able to do better in that way. I remember just sort of like, if I haven't been, the idea of like, if I haven't been somewhere, if I haven't taken myself somewhere, it's going to be really hard to like go there with someone, or harder to go there with someone. So I definitely wonder about like I think there's a question of like, does everybody need it? And then there's the question of like, do people who are engaging in the mental health profession need it, or rather like how beneficial it is something that really keys in for me, because I think that participating in something, I sort of think of it as like almost like playing baseball. Like if a pitcher, if someone's pitching and they're usually batting, they're going to have a higher understanding of just the dynamic between the pitcher and the batter. And for counseling, I think this holds true as well.
So what if I use the term, does everybody needs a corrective emotional experience?
I mean, I like that. I think the caveat would be, well, what do they need a corrective emotional experience for, would sort of be my question. If someone has necessarily like gone through something like really significant or really bad, then that's, I think, the concern for me of like, well, if someone needs a corrective emotional experience for that, it sort of implies that that thing happened in the first place. And also like corrective emotional experiences are so powerful. It's like, for me, it's one of the ways that I conceptualize that healing happens inside of therapy. So I still like that.
Yeah. I mean, and what you need for a corrective emotional experience could be as a result of living through a lot. I'm not saying you did, but the example is you could have lived through a lot of trauma, whereas I just had a parent that I disagreed with that passed away, that I need to have an emotional experience, so different levels of corrective emotional experiences. But I think everybody benefits from that. There's no losers in that process.
I think it more like, for me, like what Jung was aiming at and wrote a lot about is people, they need to begin introspection, and then that may lead to these other things. He was huge on that, and he said that the problems of the species will not abate until introspection becomes something that is considered nominal and ordinary.
And I think too, like, there's the idea of people can have corrective emotional experiences outside of counseling and therapy as well.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So my question, what's one lesson about boundaries that counseling students often don't understand until they're practicing?
I would say when a counselor experiences a powerful attraction to a client, you have to have your psyche hijacked by your libido to really fully understand how much consideration that requires, how much supervision. And, I think a lot of, we all know the right answer. I mean, I think still the most common ethical breach is people engaging in intimate relations with clients, which is terrifying to me. But I think some people don't fully understand the power of the emotional hijacking that goes on when your libido fixates on someone and says, this one. And you're like, well, no, can't do that because this is a client. And really wrestling through the emotional part of the issues. Cognitively, yeah, we're all like, no, you can't have that type of relationship with a client. But to wrestle with it emotionally, and then to make that determination of how one is going to metabolize that, or if one can't, referring the client. But I think that requires firsthand experience.
That's a good one, Elliott.
Yeah, it really makes me think about like the cognitive part of ethics versus like the emotional reality. This was something for me that came up. I think of, I frame counseling for myself of more like a communication field, and that some of the ways that we learn to communicate differently, at least inside of like my counseling program, definitely seeped outside of the counseling room. And that was something that I also noticed with like other students in the program too. Just like this is just this like very dramatic and global change in communication over a few years period of time, and that the way that someone communicates as they enter the program is very different, or can be very different than the way that they communicate as they exit the program. And I imagine with, continued counseling as well. Something that I've noticed is that sometimes I'll almost be catching myself being inside of conversations, especially post-grad, and especially when I started practicing, that I would be sort of engaging in the same kind of rhythm of conversation as I would be inside of the therapy space. And I've been catching myself more and more on this, because it's just something that I think it's such an immersive part of the experience, finally starting to practice, and then also like scaling that back and compartmentalizing that and keeping that strictly inside of a therapy. And at the same time, like there's a lot of ways that, I feel like people communicate inside of therapy that feel really good outside of therapy too. So it's just something I've been thinking about a lot lately. But it definitely came to a head, like I would say during my internship, where I was noticing like this is happening also outside of these therapy spaces. And I don't want to therapize people.
Mitch, you got me thinking about the dramatic change of who we are from when we were a student learning to do this, and where we grow, what we grow into, and how different of a person I am or was 10 years after I, was trained than I was while I was being trained. Different in the sense of a little bit more, more introspective, more silent and more quiet. And I think in a sense, a little bit more mature in terms of the way in which I view the world. Now, that could have possibly happened without me getting trained in counseling. That could have just been a developmental thing. But yeah, for your answer made me think that just with the simple things in terms of how we communicate, like completely different. My answer to this question was, I still think the thing that's difficult that you don't learn while you're a student is how you can't talk about your profession. And by that, I mean, while you're a student, yeah, you're talking about your clients because that's what you do, although you shouldn't outside of supervision. Students sit in class and they say, this client today, blah, 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 to other students. And that's kind of the newness of the experience. And so they're kind of sharing, this is the new thing for me now. This is what's tackling my day. But at least where I went with that after I finished my schooling, and while I was doing my schooling, was I kind of started to see it, and this comes from my Catholic upbringing, I kind of started to see it as the priesthood and confessional. It's like priests don't walk out of the confessional and go to dinner with people and say, oh, let me tell you the sins I heard today. And that made the job much more sacred in my eyes versus then, oh, I'm the super problem solver. No, it's a much more sacred relationship. And so the idea of not talking about my job, and I have a nephew who talks about his work, and he works with phobics, and he had entertained the family with all the crazy phobics he had to deal with. And I thought, no, this is a kind of a sacred space that you're violating when you do that. So I don't think the lesson of boundaries that they don't learn yet is that you're a vessel, and there's very few places where that vessel can empty. Supervision through your own work and therapy. I'll use that term again. But there's very few places you can't, like everybody else can talk about their job on the street generally, but we can't. So I think that's the boundary issue that they don't learn while they're being trained.
Hey, Marty, you triggered a memory in me. Do you remember Joe Saunders?
I think so. Yeah.
I think he was down at Tiffin down there. I forget what university, the Heidelberg down there.
Yeah.
But when I was a beginning doctoral student, he'd been to a couple of my presentations, and he was at one of the battles Ansel Wolt and I had with Tom Sweeney about, this whole counselor identity thing. And Joe, he was introducing me at a conference, and he said, oh, this is Elliott. He masks his insecurity with arrogance and amazing humor. And then I was like, yeah, that's about right. But then years later we met, and he said, oh, Elliott, I remember you. And he said, you're still arrogant and funny, but you seem less insecure. That's
well, Elliott, you've got the next question.
Okay. What are the benefits and drawbacks of large classes for counseling content? I'm thinking anywhere from 40 to 70 people. Benefits and drawbacks.
Yeah, so this is a interesting one because I'm hearing too, this could maybe be specific to counseling content. I think one of the first things that comes to mind is how long is the class, right? And if I'm thinking about counseling courses in our program, right, they're about like 2.5 to 3 hours long. And that's a lot of time to begin with. I like those types of classes when it is smaller. And so I think that one of the big benefits to having some of these longer time classes when they are smaller is that there's a greater amount of interconnection between students. Some of the drawbacks of these larger classes to me are definitely related to attention and sort of like bystandering, I guess, of not in the clinical sense, but like in the way that like I can just sort of like, if I want to, I can just take a class off almost by virtue of just the class size is so much larger, and I think that that's something that students, myself included, I'll throw myself in there, can definitely get into with some of these larger classes. There's strategies that, I definitely employed when I was in graduate school, like where am I sitting? Do I have my laptop open or not? It really does seem to be a matter of attention. If I know that the professor's attention is split between 40 students, then I'm sort of risking less, I guess. And however, if it's a class of 12 students, well, I've got to be really present because there's less of there's more attention that could be paid to me, I suppose. Obviously, there's like cost effective stuff, when, with larger classes and everything. And, with a class of 40, there's more activities that you can do than a class of like 10 or 12, and a greater variety of perspectives and opinions in those larger classes. I've always preferred smaller classes in my experience. 12 to 18 feels really good for counseling programs just because of the interpersonal nature of things.
Hey, Mitch, do you mind if I tag on a question for you?
Please.
Because you've done some brilliant guest lectures for me, but those were in pretty large classes. How was it as a lecturer when you had like 60 people?
So I think the largest that I've ever done a like workshop or lecture for is about 100 people. And it feels like there's enough people for me is right about 20 if I'm doing like more of like something like a lecture. And the larger it gets, the more just sort of flowy I think it gets for me. If I'm doing something that's more front facing and I'm sort of, discussing a topic and providing information as opposed to getting a class involved or something like that. I've always felt really comfortable around the 20 spot, but I know that like there are some nerves with those classes that are like not too big. Like if I'm doing like a workshop in front of 100 people, like there's just generally, I think, going to be less questions because of the amount of people there. With 40, though, it becomes a lot more. I've noticed that it's just become a lot more involved. There's a lot more back and forth. There's a lot more questions. There's a lot more, hey, this is my input here. What is your perspective on this? A lot more perspective sharing. And so I think there's like a wide range of variability that I haven't really keyed in on, but it's a good question.
I struggled with this question because I had to keep in my headspace that this was not a one-off, that this was a lecture class that I would be delivering through the whole semester. And I had a hard time finding any benefit other than I could pass on a lot of information, which is not necessarily the way I like to teach, the idea that I'm dumping a lot of information on a large group of people. And we have one class that is to that extent. It is our career class, and it's by choice of the instructor that it's that large. There's a lot of students enjoy it, but I think there's a lot of entertainment that goes on in that. And I can only think when I've been thrown in generally uncomfortable situations with 40 or more people, outside of a conference setting. And I'm going to be presenting in front of close to 100 later this week at a conference. And I'm anxious about that because I feel like I have to prepare more, particularly because it's out of my field that I'm talking about it, and that I'm not as familiar with the audience. But anyways, when I'm been asked to do large lecture classes, and that's occurred primarily on my travels in Indonesia and also in Turkey, I wind up violating a lot of the rules. Like I don't stand behind the podium. I'll walk up the aisles or sometimes the steps if it's in a theater to talk with people. And I wind up turning it into more of a experience than what would be a standard lecture that people would expect. So I personally don't see a lot of benefits. If it's just about content, you can give people content, and there's not much I'm adding to it if I'm just teaching content. I think back to my biology classes that had like 150 to 300 people in it. It was just delivering content and me capturing that content and studying it and trying to figure it out. That was not necessarily beneficial for me, but it did mean that the biology department only had to do one Bio 101 class each semester taught in a large lecture series. So yeah, I struggle with that. The drawbacks just in terms of size, class management, things like that with a class that large. Elliott?
Yeah, no, these are good thoughts. And I'm when I was in the role of chairperson, I was licensed both in psychology and in counseling. And I wanted to do cross-disciplinary teaching. And I got the opportunity to do that when the person who taught psychopharmacology in psychology retired. And it was, I don't want to mention her name, without checking with her, but there was one brilliant student who said, they've got a psychopharm class in the counseling program. Why can't we do that? And that started a relationship with psychology where I started teaching psychopharmacology to counseling students as well as school psychology and clinical psychology. In some cases, I thought there were very important cross kind of disciplinary ideas that came out in the dialogue. but I was also trying to get more faculty. And so I was making deals with the provost. And I said, if we bring in this many student credit hours and we increase it by this much every year over 3 years, what will you give us? And they would give us a faculty position. So it was kind of a ace in the pocket. But back to one of your ideas, Marty, I had to do a lot more edutainment, and I have, songs we sing in Psycho Farm. And I talked to my colleagues a lot about, because we do psychopharmacology in fall and in spring, and the fall course is more like 30 students. The spring can get up to 70. And, but I'll be honest, I couldn't believe psychology was just willing to give away all this student credit hours. And as a mercenary chairperson, I was like, we'll take them. And we took them, and we still do. And they're happy with the results. I'm happy with the results. But I feel like I don't have an attendance policy, because I like you said, Marty, people can get content in many ways. And I'm like, if you can pass Psycho Farm by still missing 5 classes and get an A, God bless you. Good for you. You are what I would consider one of those intense sort of students that figure it out. And there are tons of those. And then there are people like, I had student study groups come in, and they helped me craft different ways to teach the course. I used to use an anatomical coloring book for the brain, but they said it was too much. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And then we would start focusing in on just simple, almost caricatures of the nervous system to make certain points about how neurotransmission works. And those student study groups helped me figure out ways to make a larger class more engaging. And they were also like, we need more case quizzes. And I think since you had the class, Mitch, we have a case quiz for every class of medication, and people, they really seem to like that. So less time on content that they can read. I wrote the freaking book, so I know what's in there, and they don't need me to say it all. But, we scored so many coups getting faculty with that source of student credit hours. So I was in a very mercenary frame of mind, but I was also concerned about the quality of the educational experience, and I'm still working on it. But I'm a believer in, when a student needs to get in a class to graduate, you get them in there. I don't care if it's going to put your class over 40. You get them in, you get them finished. We're supposed to help people matriculate. And if they're not going to open another section, they got to go in your section. And I would be the first to take them in my section. But, so I have a little different perspective. I think maybe when people haven't been in an administrative role, they don't see a lot of good can be done by prostituting oneself for a good cause. And I like to think that that's what I am, some sort of, morally even prostitute. And I can just put myself out there and say, you can use me as much as you want in this capacity, as long as we get something in return. Yeah, that sounds mercenary, but there's Joe Saunders again. Elegant is arrogant, and he uses humor, but it's hard to tell which outweighs the other.
Mitch, you've got the next question.
So the question is, what creative skill that you've never engaged with before would you like to try if you had the time, money, and energy?
You put these caveats on here, that you've never engaged with before. And I guess I've engaged with it, but I don't consider myself of greater talent. If I had money and time and effort and energy to be able to do it, I would probably try and do singing. I've been in choirs, mainly playing instruments and singing along. They tell me I'm a pretty good tenor. My daughter does voice, and she claims she gets it from me and my side of the family. I've sung in a choir with my daughter for a short period of time, but nothing professionally. And she was in Fiddler for the last 3 weeks, and I saw 2 shows of that. And at the end of the show, I went up to the faculty member who was playing Tevye, and I said to him, I really like what was done. And I guess I regret not pursuing more stage stuff when I was younger and I was doing more stage stuff. Because at this point in my life, I don't see myself ever playing Tevye. I would be fine just being in the chorus. There's something about the magic of being on stage that singing and learning how to sing professionally or at least having some skill at it, might allow me to do that as a old man in some place somewhere. So yeah, that's my answer to the question, probably.
I loved this question, Mitch, and it brings up for me what I think is something that, I don't know, I think it requires a spark of talent that the creator of the universe has been very generous with me. But the I've done theater, I do music. I will hopefully go back to theater. I want to do a little more singing, playing instruments, percussion, all of that. Oh, just love it. What I wish I could do is draw and do like sketches. Here's what I would like to do. I wish I could have done, everyone who has been an intimate partner of mine throughout these 64 years, and there's not a lot. I mean, it's a small number, but I wish I could have been able to draw them nude, not nude, it doesn't matter. But my deep appreciation for what they shared with me, I wish I could have drawn them and just, it would not be published like anywhere. It would just be to give to them something that reflected what I experienced in what I will call their soul. I wish I could have drawn something that illuminated the transcendent radiance that just drew me to them. I would have loved to have been able to give that to the people who shared that with me. That's what I would have done. But I think my uncle was a brilliant visual artist, but there's some gene or something there that I really don't have. And I think it would require divine intervention for me to get that spark. But if I got it, that's what I would do with it. I think you're muted, Mitch.
Oh, sorry. There we go. I really appreciate both of your answers. I also did not receive the drawing gene, or maybe haven't practiced it enough. I don't know. Certainly something that part of me wishes I had, and the other part of me is okay with the musical part that I think I got. I know for me, I've been thinking about this for a really long time, going back into fifth grade, and I think I've even mentioned it on the pod before, but I remember actually it was the sixth grade when they introduced saxophones into our middle school band, and I was a trumpet player. I played trumpet for 3 years until I got braces and went from first few chairs to last few chairs within one day, and that was a little bit too much for my ego to take. But I don't have braces now, and so even after quitting the trumpet, I finally got a chance to pick up saxophone. Just in fact played it for the first time today. I played in quotes, but I figured that, hey, I did have some time, money, and energy for it, a little bit of a late graduation gift, but it's something that I've wanted to do for a really long time. And, I've played specifically piano for a while, and I've just stuck with, piano, keyboard, synthesizer, and that's sort of just been my primary instrument, and that's the instrument that I play. And so now it's sort of this new venture, I guess, to try a different instrument. It's very weird to pick up another instrument and be thinking about all the ways that like my piano playing is going to impact, my saxophone playing, and how my saxophone playing might make me a better piano player. Like, I don't know. So it's kind of an interesting journey that I'm embarking on right now.
That is delightful. I mean, saxophone is such a sexy sound. Is it an alto, tenor, or a baritone? Tenor? Okay, yeah. No, yeah. Lovely sound.
Yeah.
I worked with a sax player who his real dedication was clarinet in the kind of Betty Goodman idea. But boy, when he got on that sax, he would just transfix people with those sounds.
Yeah. I forgot to say this. The guy who played Tevye, the faculty member, when I told him that I regret this, he said, "Never too late. It's never too late." And I worked for a psychologist one time who there was another psychologist in town that our agency had to interact with quite a bit. And the psychologist I worked for knew that this psychologist used to be like a big saxophone player. So anytime he wanted to insult the other psychologist, he would say, "Should have stayed a saxophone player," instead of being a psychologist.
Ouch. Ooh.
So My question is, what's a minor inconvenience that can ruin your entire day?
Only one comes to mind, and for some reason I didn't get caught up reading the questions, so this is the first time I've heard that. I'm on therapy for chronic pain, and I have pain medication. And on a regular basis, I'll run into pharmacists who don't want to fill the medication. And it seems like a minor inconvenience, but of course, there's a load of problems when that happens. And wow, yeah, that can ruin my entire day. I always get it resolved, but I get tired of getting it resolved. Like every time there's a new pharmacist, it's like, oh, well, we got to have this song and dance again. I'm like, why don't you just talk to the pain doctor? Why don't you just talk to them? But that's something that I've been working on, doing all kinds of different therapies to try to get away from it and reduce it. But yeah, it's a tough one. And when you can't think straight because things hurt so badly, there's no quality of life. So the stuff that they've got me on, and I've titrated down amazingly from like 10 years ago, what they had me on, but it's just like, there's no real good solution to this. Injections work only so much. Radio frequency ablation works only so much. And that's one of the primary stressors I have experienced, especially in the 21st century. This nursery school of a country and their mentality about we can't trust anyone with anything except a gun. That's fine. But, a drug that eases pain. Well, for goodness sakes, why would we give you that? There's a lot of stories behind there, but I'll stop there.
This one was a bit challenging for me until I found the general idea of it. And a lot of these minor inconveniences for me have to do with snow and snow weather. I know for me, there are times where it's like, and I'm not even sure if that's necessarily considered a minor inconvenience as opposed to just like, it's just the weather. But I know for me, driving in the snow can definitely be pretty mentally taxing, especially when, my commute was 40 minutes. And generally, if I am driving anywhere based on where I live, I am driving about 40 minutes. There's also one thing that reminds me a little bit of when I was in college, especially with snow, is I didn't really have good snow boots yet or a good pair of boots. And so just wet socks is something that will just really, even just a little bit, it's I don't have a pair to change into or anything like that. I've just got to go with that all day is something that can make me feel frustrated. I think it's a lot of snow type conditions and snow type experiences. I can't think as well when I'm cold. And so I think sometimes the weather outside will make me not be in the best of moods, I suppose. Things like that. I really love the summer right now. It's fantastic.
All right. So minor convenience. This, I don't know where this question came from, but I had an immediate answer. Minor convenience for me is going to the eye doctor, because the eye doctor is always an hour or more late from the time they tell you you're going to be there. So I can't figure out after all these years why the eye doctor can't figure out how long it takes them to do their job and just schedule appropriately, because I don't want to sit in their waiting room, which has no tables, has very short chairs, so I can't do laptop computer stuff in it. And I'm forced to listen to and see slideshows of all the wonderful vacations they went on with their children. And some of these are 10 years old, so they're not children anymore, but that's the slideshow that plays. I have had it, and it ruins my whole day. I found out that the place opens at 7. It's like I'm trying to buy concert tickets. I got to be in the parking lot at 6:30, and I've got to get in the door, and that doesn't even guarantee if I have a 7:15 appointment that I'm not going to be seen until 8:15 anyways. It ruins my whole, and my other doctors, they can keep a schedule. And the funny thing is, my wife and I go to the same eye doctor. So it's sort of when's your next appointment? Aileen will go, it's 10:30. I said, well, pack a lunch. Because by then the back backlog is built up even more. And then she forgets to bring like headphones so she can watch a movie. Instead, she has to watch the vacation slides in El Salvador doing relief work. Our optometrists have a soul, and they like to do good things for other people, but they can't keep a schedule on time. Yeah.
I'm right there with you.
Final shot question. If your pet, or if you don't have a pet, if there was a random animal, suddenly became fluent in English, what's the first thing you'd ask it?
Well, I would be like, hey, are you having the same individual sentient experience that I'm having? And if so, what do you think the meaning of the universe is? And, how does that relate to your tribe, your pack of creatures? And is there anything else that maybe we can do to kind of join forces? Because you never know when you're going to need an ally in this life.
Gosh, this makes me think of my had a golden retriever when I was much younger. I think when she was older, things to make her life easier, and because sometimes it's, there's only so much communication you can get from a dog about there's basically there's the treat kind of vibe, there's the food kind of vibe, there's I need to go out kind of vibe, and then there's some other emotional vibes. So I think what would make life more enjoyable and comfortable for them.
This started an argument. Not an argument, a disagreement. I decided not to turn it into an argument with my wife because I wrote the questions up, came up with this as a final shot question, and then said, hey, guess what the final shot question is on the show tonight? And I said this question, and we both thought of our dog. And she said, the dog, I said, the question I would have is, how are we as owners? Are we doing a good job? And Aileen reacted to that dogs don't think that deeply. I said, well, you don't know that. And two, this dog can suddenly speak English, so I can ask them questions in ways. She goes, oh, yeah, I know the dog's happy. The dog, food, walk, ball, follow me around. The dog's happy. I said, no, that's just your assumption. That's your anthropomorphic way of thinking that the dog is happy. I would want to ask the question to the dog, are you happy? Are we doing a good job? And then she wanted to say, no, well, that's a stupid question, blah, blah, blah. And I decided, this is the beginning of an argument, and I will just keep driving till we get to the store. Yeah, that's it. That wraps up the show, actually. So thanks to the firing squad, Elliott and Mitch joining tonight. We did double rounds, and that was kind of cool. Check out other podcasts that we have at the podtalk.net website. There's a variety of podcasts that we produce through that website and have been doing it for a while. This is our 90th episode of Circular Firing Squad. We've been doing this for a couple of years. We try to do it every other week. Sometimes it stretches to once a month, but we're heading into our 100th episode of Circular Firing Squad. So if you've just begun listening, that's great. There's plenty of back episodes you can go to, the same kind of mood and same kind of stuff. And as we get closer to 100, we will come up with something special to do for the 100th episode. Our theme music is from Menage a Quad, Real Swing Shet. That's it for this episode of Circular Firing Squad. Fire, aim. Okay.